they don't just know what their interests are and how they learn and, their progress in math or reading or writing or whatever. But I have actually told the teacher, like, their souls, they know them inside and out. And as a parent, that's just it's comforting, right? Because in some ways, as a parent, you're trying to figure out, like, am I doing this right? Am I giving my kids what they need? I've never done this before. No one's ever parented my kids before. And so it's really nice to know that at the school, and I think a big part of this is their Montessori training, that they have such insight into the human beings.
I'm Glenn Herbert, and I'm an editor with Our Kids. We're speaking with insiders from Canada's leading private schools to gain insights into their programs, culture, traditions, and leadership. This includes insights from parents, alumni, and administrators. This is the Our Kids Insider Perspective.
So it's funny how things work out. So our process was really just one of, we lived in the States, and then my husband got a job to come back to Toronto, which we'd wanted to do. And so Montessori was really important to me. I went to Montessori school, and having a Jewish Montessori school made it a no-brainer. And so the process was really not a process of looking. It was a process of, I knew the school was there, and we didn't even look at alternatives. Our older son was 3 at the time, or well, he wasn't quite 3, he was 2.5. And then we had 2-month-old twins. And so it was just an easy decision that didn't require any research because, like I said, I'd been to Montessori and we're Jewish, and the Jewish education is important, and the Montessori education was important. So to have the combination made it a no-brainer. Our older son is at Claude Watson. He's in their special drama program at Earl Haig. And so his transition to high school was this past year. So he went from, this lovely Montessori community where he'd been from the age of 3 until the end of grade 8, into high school in the, with COVID and quadrimesters and virtual, and sometimes in person, sometimes virtual. And it gave my husband and I great pride to see how he did through the transition. He, approached each of his courses with curiosity and interest, and took his study and his learning really seriously. He had no qualms about reaching out to his teachers when he needed extra help, or when he needed, at times when he didn't agree with what they said on his assignments, or if he wanted more clarification or just to learn more, which was really amazing to see because it was during the pandemic, right? He hadn't met them for the most part. He met the first few, and then after that it was all online. And so to see his transition on all fronts, he did really well academically, above average on pretty much all of his marks. He made friends. He built really good relationships with his teachers, and so it was really nice to see, to see that what he brought into Montessori carry forward as well. It's interesting because all 3 of them are so different. So it's really interesting because they're very close in age. They're 2.5 years apart. And so developmentally, they're often not far from each other, and yet they are so different. So I would say that for our eldest son, I think where he really benefited from the school and what he's really enjoyed is the social interaction with the learning, right? So he's very social, and is always connected very easily with people. And so the piece of doing different group work with people, and the work they did in the middle school around planning food and lunches together, that was a real highlight for him. they took on extra learning together as a group. When a group of them were working on their bar mitzvahs, they all decided they would continue reading Torah together. And so the self-initiative with the social element was really good for him. I think for our daughter, who's one of the twins, for her, it's really been around being able to choose what her focus is. So the story I would tell there is when she was 3.5, she walked into her classroom, she looked at her teacher and she said, "Today I'm going to learn how to write my name in cursive." And she sat at a table all day with the sandpaper letters, which is the Montessori way of helping children do the hand motions and eventually lead to handwriting. So with the sandpaper letters and then with tracing paper, and at the end of the day, she had written her name in cursive. And continues to demonstrate that, right? Like she's like, "I'm going to learn this. I'm going to go and I'm going to learn it." And then for our other son, who's her twin, I think for him, it's also been in the freedom and flexibility. But in his case, it's mostly to express himself. So he has big, bold questions and big, bold ideas. And so, in the last 18 months, especially, he's really asking a lot of questions around how do we take care of each other as a society, and what does COVID mean, and social justice, and really understanding inclusion and LGBTQ2S plus and Black Lives Matter, and really struggling with, how do we treat each other, and so that he can ask those big questions at school and engage in big dialogue like that is really good for him. And so they each, I think the common theme there is that within the Montessori environment, they have the freedom through which to make choices that further their education based on where they are, and yet they've all expressed it so differently. Yeah, so if I had to pick one thing, I would say it is how deeply the teachers know our children. And I mean deeply. They know, they don't just know what their interests are and how they learn, and their progress in math or reading or writing or whatever. But I have actually told a teacher that their souls. They know them inside and out. And as a parent, that's just it's comforting, right? Because in some ways, as a parent, you're trying to figure out, like, am I doing this right? Am I giving my kids what they need? I've never done this before. No one's ever parented my kids before. And so it's really nice to know that at the school, and I think a big part of this is their Montessori training, that they have such insight into the human beings who are in their classroom. It's just really nice to have, when we have, parent teacher meetings or conferences, and to talk about them, you really can tell how deeply they know each of them, and how deeply they respect their personalities and who they are, and then use that to help further their learning. It's a hard question because we've been really happy with it over, the kids have been there forever. Um, I think it's a tough one. I think in some ways being larger would be good for the kids because it's a relatively small school, and so having more social circles and interactions. But the balance of that is because they're in a mixed age classroom, they end up being friends with kids who are older and younger than them, and so that's a really nice benefit of it too. I have to be honest and say I don't remember that much when it was our son who was there, because we had 2-month-old twins at home, and so those whole there's a few years that are just a blur. Um, I do remember his CASA teacher. So CASA is like what Montessori refers to as kindergarten. Um, Calling us a couple of times in the first couple of months he was there, like just calling us at home in the evening and giving us updates on how he was doing, which I thought was really lovely. And yeah, I think with the other two with the twins, what surprised me is just how easily they went in, like they just got into it right away. When I went to pick them up the first day, they didn't want to leave. It was a pretty easy, integration for all of them, from the daycares that they've been at before to Montessori. So I think it's a combination of the Montessori values and then the Judaic ones as well. And so from a Montessori perspective, the values that I value that I think are really important are really around the children having the freedom to choose their learning path within the structure of the classroom and the environment. So it's not that it's a total free for all, but it's more that we all as human beings, and we do this as adults too, we gravitate towards different types of work at different times. And so by giving the kids the flexibility to do that, they actually learn much faster because they learn when they're ready to learn. And so, and I saw it especially with the twins, because I told the story earlier about my daughter at the age of 3.5 saying, today I'm going to learn how to write. And she did. And her twin brother 3 years later would, loved having pencils in his hands because they were really good for play fighting. And he had no interest in writing. And then by the age of 6.5, they both had absolutely beautiful handwriting. They wouldn't have both had a positive experience in writing if they would have had to either wait or be forced to do it earlier. And so for me, that piece of really following each child's learning path is a really important value. And I do a lot of work in leadership development. And so I have a good degree of professional knowledge and expertise in the space. And so to see that applied to children is wonderful. And I think from the Judaic perspective, it's a good, solid Jewish education, and learning of Hebrew and learning about the holidays and traditions in a pluralistic way, and basically meaning that it's not there isn't any one of the different types of Judaism ingrained. It's about who are we and how do we explore who we are, what our traditions, our history is, our values. And again, to see how each of our 3 kids and their friends have, what that is instilled in each of them is different for each of them. And it should be, because their individual beliefs around spirituality. And at the same time, there's a strong sense of belonging, which I think is really important as well. We are a very nice community. It's the first word that comes to mind. For being a private school, relatively humble. Many of us are at the school because we deeply believe in the school, in the combination of it being Jewish and Montessori. And so for many families, it is a I don't know, sacrifice is too strong a word, but a very conscious decision to spend money on education at the expense of other things, right? So lots of families with one car, to balance that out and to, do less things outside to be able to afford that. We are a very kind group of families. A lot of multi-generational friendships have ensued, which is really lovely. And I mean multi-generational, both within the kids and also as parents. So our children are friends with kids who are 2 and 3 and 4 years older, and also 2 and 3 and 4 years younger. And for me, that speaks to sort of the community piece of the school. And I think there is a piece of, as parents who've chosen to send our kids there, we do have a common values of, deep respect for children as human beings, and a connection obviously into Judaism as well. And yeah, it's a very nice community. So one of the things they loved at the school is we had a softball team, um, and and it was wonderful. So there's the Jewish schools have a league, just like all, a lot of the private schools have leagues and they play against each other. And so the Jewish schools have a softball league. And because our school is relatively small, most schools only have 2 grades. So I can't remember the grades now, but anyway, it's 2 grades. But because we're small, we didn't have enough participants in those 2 grades. So we had to go with younger kids even. And the other schools are big enough that they have tryouts. And our school is, small and mighty and enthusiastic. And so whoever wanted to be on the softball team was on the softball team. And to see the kids' enthusiasm, and I don't like the word sportsmanship. I don't know what the gender neutral is, but the piece around how they showed up on the field with the other schools was just so amazing because the first year they didn't do very well, but the second and third years they actually started doing better and better just through sheer love and passion of the sport and their coach who's a former parent of the school, and the pride they took and where that took them again from back into the classroom from a learning perspective. One of our sons did a project where he researched all the baseball diamonds where all the major league teams play in the US and did a whole written project about it, when they were built, how many people they sat, important things that happened. And so this like passion for baseball grew, or for softball I should say, grew into like this huge school assignment that he did where he like looked them all up and he had pictures of all of them. Um and it was just seeing their pride that was just so rewarding, for both our boys. Our daughter played too, she didn't really get into it that much. I think for and then there's seen so many different things over the years. So, I mentioned this earlier, but for our older son, after his bar mitzvah, with a couple of his colleagues, they actually decided to continue learning how to read Torah, which is a really, really hard thing to do. And so they approached the synagogue. The students approached the synagogue to say, could we borrow a Torah scroll? So there's a whole very special treatment of a Torah that you have to have. Could we borrow one? Because we want to keep reading. And so to see that, the spark in them, and it's been like that in a whole bunch of other, different topics over the years. Those are a couple of the highlights I can think of. I think, pieces too. I was talking about one of our sons earlier, and just his passion for how the world should be and how we should, treat other people, and seeing how that's being, fostered in the school is great. So yeah, lots of examples. Yeah, for sure. So the first would be around Montessori. And for me, the reason there is that Montessori education system is unique in that it is the oldest system now that actually is based on observing how children learn. The traditional school system of a teacher, teaching a group of 20 children is largely based on industrialization in the military models, which is not how we now know human beings learn. So we now know how adults learn through a lot of neuroscience. And it's actually the same way that children learn. And it's through experiences and it's through social learning. So learning with groups of people, it's learning from others and through others, and by being motivated ourselves. And that really is what the basis of Montessori is. It started by an Italian doctor who was a woman who wasn't allowed to practice medicine in the nicer hospitals, and so she worked with slum kids and observed them, and through observing them, built this education system that actually is built around children and how they learn. And so for me, that is just so hugely important, because it instills in them not just the academic learning, which of course they get, but more a love of learning and a confidence in their ability to learn anything, because so much of the learning is self-guided. So I think that would be one piece, as a Montessori piece. The other piece would be around the Judaica, right? So obviously we're Jewish school, and the piece around, you know, being part of a Jewish community, and being part of a Jewish community that has families across the spectrum. Families who are very, very religious to families who are very, very secular, and yet all identify as Jews and as wanting to be part of a Jewish community and tradition and continuity. And then I think the third piece I would say is the community of the staff, the teachers, the administration, the parents, the children. It is just a lovely community. And it's easy for me to say that I'm in it, but it's actually really, when we were going to a lot of bar mitzvahs with our older son, not with our twins, because it was during COVID. So there was no social piece to it. We were all at home. Um, and and the number of people who came to the events would comment on how nice the kids were from the Montessori school at the events, and how much they knew and how they were so respectful. And so it's also a piece that other people recognize about us in our community that is really nice to hear and see. I think the advice I would give a, a friend going into a Montessori environment in particular would be around trust in the system and trust in your child. Um, and because you don't have the traditional grades associated in a Montessori environment, you need to look for other markers that'll tell you what kind of progress children are making. So I think there's a big piece there of just trust your child. Trust that your child has an innate sense of wanting to learn and explore and be part of the world around them, because we do as human beings, and that the teachers will help foster that along the way, and have fun on the journey, because it goes by really quick.
For more information about this school, you can visit their profile at ourkids.net.